Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Build Heritage Subcommittee. We're going to get started. I think with the weather this morning, a couple of our colleagues are probably stuck somewhere along the way. Okay, so we haven't received any regrets, so we'll look forward to seeing, and one that just walked in the room, our colleagues, which is wonderful. Any declarations of interest? None? Wonderful. Confirmation of minutes from our meeting on the 12th of April. Those carried? Great. So we have two substantive items before us. We're going to start with, and we're going to hold both of them because we're going to have staff presentations and we have speakers for our second item. So we're going to start with the proposed designation of the Ottawa Rowing Club Boathouse. Address is 810 Lady Grey Drive, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And staff are going to give a short presentation explaining the rationale for designation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Unfortunately, Mackenzie Kim wasn't able to be here for health reasons today, so I'm going to present on her behalf. So the item before you is a request for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. It pertains to the property at 8 to 10 Lady Grey Drive, known as the Ottawa Rowing Club. The property is located at the northern tip of Lower Town along the shoreline of the Ottawa River. The property is bordered by the Macdonald-Cartier Bridge, Sussex Drive, and accessed by Lady Grey Drive. For the benefit of members of the public or members of the committee who may not be familiar with the site, you can see on the screen that there are two boathouse buildings on the site. However, the designation excludes the later boathouse, built in 1985, which is seen at the top. I'll also just flag for the committee that there is a somewhat complex ownership situation at the site. As you can see on the map, the boathouse is located at the corner of 4 different parcels, 2 of which are owned by the city in yellow, and 2 of which are owned by the NCC in red, which doesn't look red, but it is red, I assure you, and leased to the city on a long-term lease. The Ottawa Rowing Club then has a sublease with the city to use the building. This designation will apply to all 4 parcels. The Ottawa Rowing Club Boathouse was constructed around 1898 to replace a floating wooden structure that was anchored at the foot of the Rideau Canal near the Chaudière Falls. When the floating boathouse was damaged in 1887, the club discussed establishing a more permanent location, and in 1898, the club was constructed in its current location. Here's an archival photo showing some very competitive rowers showing off their oars in front of the boathouse. The Ottawa Rowing Club Boathouse can be seen in this lovely postcard image from an undetermined date. Here are some close-up images of the building in its current state. The original form continues to be articulated. Other original architectural elements include the 6/1 sash windows and the 9-pane circular windows in the gables, and its broken gambrel roof form, which is quite unique. Looking east toward the Macdonald-Cartier Bridge, although not the original cladding, the existing horizontal wood siding and cedar shingles are generally sympathetic to the building's original character. This photo is looking west. You can make out the Alexandra Bridge in the background. It's hard to believe these photos were taken only a couple weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago by Mackenzie, but I'm pretty sure the ice is now gone, thankfully. And although the building has undergone some modifications over the years, the original exposed wood beams remain prominent within the interior and are a character-defining heritage attribute of the building. Views of Parliament Hill can be enjoyed from the western staircase adjacent to the building. That's okay. The official plan states that individual buildings, structures, sites, and cultural heritage landscapes will be designated as properties of cultural heritage value under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The provincial policy statement also provides strong direction for the conservation of heritage resources and significant cultural heritage landscapes. The official plan also states that the city, as the owner of many cultural heritage resources, will set an example of conservation leadership by designating certain properties under the Ontario Heritage Act. Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act gives municipalities the ability to designate properties of cultural heritage value under Part 4. In order to do so, properties must meet Ontario Regulation 0906. This regulation requires that a property meet at least one of the following criteria for determining cultural heritage value. Those being design or physical value, associative or historical value, and finally, contextual value. The Ottawa Rowing Club Boathouse has design value as a rare example of 19th century recreational architecture in Ottawa. Constructed circa 1898, the building has several unique architectural features, including its broken gambrel roof and its open beam ceilings on the interior, as mentioned earlier. The building has a high degree of architectural integrity, with many of its original features intact, including its 6/1 sash windows and the 9-pane circular windows seen in the gables. The Ottawa Rowing Club Boathouse has historical value as a symbol of the development of organized rowing in Canada. The Ottawa Rowing Club was the first rowing club in Ottawa and one of the first in central Canada. The boathouse stands as an artifact of late 19th century middle-class leisure activities, as clubs of this kind were popular in the years before widespread car ownership, as they would allow their members to pursue healthy outdoor activities without leaving the city. Additionally, many of the club's members were influential in Ottawa's history, including Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, who was the club's first president, Robert Lyon and Alan Gilmore, who were the club's first vice presidents, and also Philip D. Ross, owner of the Ottawa Journal and subsequent president of the club. Ross was part of the committee responsible for arranging the purchase of the boathouse's permanent location at its current site. The Ottawa Rowing Club Boathouse has contextual value in its setting along the Ottawa River, accessed by Lady Grey Drive. Lady Grey Drive is also part of the scenic parkway and driveway network that was an early project of the Ottawa Improvement Commission to beautify the capital. This section was originally intended to provide a seamless connection between Bredo Hall and Parliament Hill. The boathouse's location is visible from Macdonald-Cartier Bridge, from Gatineau, and also from Parliament Hill. The building is integrally linked to its location, being integrated into the foot of the cliff facing the river. The boathouse has remained in use for more than a century. Consultation associated with its designation process has included discussions with the National Capital Commission, other departments within the city, the Ottawa Rowing Club, Councillor Fleury, and Heritage Ottawa. All have either expressed support for the designation or have indicated no concern. At this time, the Lowertown Community Association has been notified, but I do not have a response from them at this time. In conclusion, the Ottawa Rowing Club Boathouse meets all these criteria of Ontario Regulation 0906. And the Right-of-Way, Heritage and Urban Design Services Department recommends the issuance of a notice of intention to designate the property under Part 4 of the Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. That was very thorough. Any questions from members? Yeah, well, I know the building well. I've been inside. It's lovely on the inside as well, as the important heritage assets that you mentioned in the presentation. So, seeing no objection and no need for questions or comments, is this item carried? Great, thank you. And thank you to staff for the work leading to this. So we'll move on to our next item, which is an application for demolition and new construction at 443 and 447 Kent Street, and alteration at 423, 425 McLeod Street, properties located in the Centretown Heritage Conservation District, designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So we're going to ask staff to introduce the item, and then we have a list of speakers.
Good morning. This is an application for demolition and new construction at 443 and 447 Kent Street, and alteration at 423 to 425 McLeod Street. All three properties are located within the Centretown Heritage Conservation District and are designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The district was designated in 1997 for its value as a surviving residential community and informal meeting ground associated with Parliament Hill. Its occupants had an immense impact on the development of Canada as a nation. The site includes a semi-detached house along McLeod Street and 2 front gable houses on Kent Street. The 2 front gable houses were constructed around 1900 during a period of rapid growth in Centretown. This type of front gabled, balloon frame, wood-clad structures were an extremely common building type across Centretown. As part of a 1995 study for the Centretown Heritage Conservation District, these 2 buildings were described as minor examples of turn-of-the-century residential buildings and were classified as Category 2 buildings. The lower image shows the semi-detached building from the side and notes the late additions from the 1960s. Here's the view looking north on Kent Street. The 2 front gable houses, as well as the brick semi-detached, are at 0 setback from the property line along Kent Street. Here's the front of the semi-detached house on McLeod Street. The building was constructed around the turn of the century. It features red brick, a wooden cornice, brick string course, brick boudoirs, front porch, exposed stone foundation, and decorative chimney. As part of this development proposal, the semi-detached building will be retained, restored, and integrated into the new building. The 1997 Centretown Heritage Conservation District Plan has guidelines regarding the conservation and restoration of residential heritage properties. The policy speaks to retaining enough of the original form, material, and decorative work to give a strong enough sense of the historical character of the streetscape. The proposal includes the demolition of the 2 front gable houses along Kent Street, as well as the additions to the rear of the McLeod Street semi. In its place, a new 4-story apartment building is proposed to be constructed. The HCD plan has not yet been updated since the changes to the Ontario Heritage Act in 2005, and therefore does not have policies directly related to the demolition because prior to 2005, demolition could only be postponed, not prevented. Pending the completion of a new Heritage Conservation District plan, the buildings at 443 and 447 Kent were reviewed in their current state and context and against the conservation and restoration policy from the 1997 plan. Staff concluded that their contribution to the character of the Heritage Conservation District was limited because of the lack of architectural and contextual value and the low integrity due to significant alterations, and that there would be thus no objection to their removal given their limited cultural heritage value. Here is the site plan. The lower part, the lower part of the plan shows the semi-detached house, which is to be retained and conserved. The new building will be set back 0.3 from the existing houses along Kent Street and feature a rooftop amenity space. The new building will be clad in red brick, an attribute of the Heritage Conservation District. Other materials include gray aluminum panels on the 4th floor and stone around the entrance and the basement level. The entrance will be located on Kent Street at the north end, next to a drive aisle that will give access to the surface parking at the rear. Here's more of a bird's eye view in which you can see the rooftop amenity space as well as the rear of the building. The landscape plan shows the removal of 7 trees colored in red on this plan, and the planting of 3 new trees which are green. It also shows new sod at the front of the McLeod semi and a significant portion at the rear of the property. New bushes and tall grass will be planted along the Kent Street facade and along the rear property line, dividing the parking area from the rear neighbors. The Centretown Heritage Conservation District Plan has guidelines for residential infill. These state that new development should be contemporary in design, distinguishable and sympathetic to the heritage property, reflect the character of the existing buildings, be 3 to 4 stories in height, reflect U and H-shaped patterns, and use brick as a primary finish. The proposed building will be 4 stories in height with a break between the 3rd and 4th floor. The building is located on the Kent Street property line, following the established character of the street. Although the guidelines suggest U and H-shaped patterns, the configuration and size of the lot does not lend itself to such a building form. Instead, the building will be rectangular in plan, sitting on an L-shaped lot. The massing will be restricted to the portion of the lot abutting Kent Street, with the rear area used for parking and amenity space. This is an appropriate approach to developing this lot, as it is consistent with the typical residential block development pattern found in this area of Centertown, where a continuous open space is located within the interior of the block, and the density generally wraps around the edge streetscape. The building will be clad in red brick to evoke the character of the neighborhood. Heritage staff also considered the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada when reviewing applications. The applicable guidelines are listed on the screen. First is to conserve the heritage value, ensure new work is physically, visually compatible with, subordinate to, and distinguishable from the historic place, and to remove non-character defining features such as an addition built after the restoration period. The new building is physically compatible with, distinguishable from, and sympathetic to the character of the building at 423 to 425 McLeod Street, which will be conserved and enhanced through the removal of contemporary additions and the reinstatement of appropriate windows. The removal of the two buildings of limited heritage value will not affect the overall character of the cultural heritage value of the Centertown HCD, as defined in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value found in the report. A cultural heritage impact statement prepared by Robertson Martin Architects was completed for this project, which concluded that the semi-detached house conforms to the standards and guidelines as well as the HCD plan, while making a positive contribution to the heritage character of the neighborhood. The cultural heritage impact statement also states that the proposal maintains the original rhythm of the streetscape and is visually compatible with the context of the HCD. Staff recommend approving the application to alter the building at 423 to 425 McLeod Street, approve the application for demolition at 443 and 447 Kent Street, and approve the application for new construction. Staff understands that though the site plan control and minor zoning amendment applications, through those applications, many concerns have been raised with respect to tree retention, the functionality of garbage pickup and snow removal, as well as setback along Kent Street. These will be addressed at the Planning Committee meeting, which is likely to be held on June 26th, as well as with this heritage application. The recommendations in this report give a direct discretion for minor design changes should any arise from any further discussions with Development Review. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. What we'll do is we'll move to our public delegations, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and comments thereafter. So I have the speakers list in front of me, and the first speaker registered is Jolly Shan. Or Rod, do you want to come up? Afterwards? Okay, so we'll move on then. So the next speaker on the list is Mindy Sechel. Good morning and welcome to the subcommittee. The way this works is all speakers have 5 minutes to speak, so I'll try and give you a warning if you go beyond 4.5 minutes, just to let you know that your time is close to expiring.
That
so
would be great.
Welcome.
Thank you. So press the button when I'm ready. It's already on. Oh, it's already on. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm new at this. I have never done this before. So hi, everyone. My name is Mindy Sechel. I'd like to thank everyone on the committee for being here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'd like to thank all my neighbors who took the time out of their busy schedules to come. There's lots of people here that are missing work this morning. And there's also, I'd like to thank all my neighbors who were not able to come because they had to go to work, but they sent letters in support of the neighborhood. So we live across the street from this proposed development. We love our quiet downtown residential historic neighborhood, and we've chosen to raise our family here. We're honored to live in a heritage home that was built in 1890. So I just learned this morning my home is older than the Ottawa Rowing Club boathouse. We know that we're temporary custodians of a part of Ottawa's history, and we take this responsibility very seriously. We're very concerned that the proposed development will have significant negative effects on the character of the neighborhood. We're not opposed to development. I want to make that very clear. There have been many new developments in the area that have been respectful of the scale and character of the existing heritage neighborhood. But this proposal does not respect either. We encourage you to oppose this application or to require significant changes to address the many issues. So first, demolition by neglect. Demolition by neglect must not be allowed to take place in this situation. This applicant wants to tear down 2 historic properties, and city staff is recommending their demolition, saying that, and Ashley talked about it earlier, their contribution to the character of the Heritage Conservation District is limited, but the part she didn't say is in the rest of her report where it says it's because of the lack of architectural and contextual value and low integrity due to significant alterations. So, had these houses been properly maintained, we would all be clamoring to keep them. Instead, we're saying it's acceptable to demolish them. This is not how we should be making decisions about heritage preservation. This does not benefit the city. This only benefits owners who fail to maintain buildings or who buy run-down buildings with no intention of restoring them. By allowing demolition by neglect, by failing to enforce heritage preservation, we risk losing parts of our collective history. Secondly, the reductions to setbacks that are being requested must not be permitted. The variances requested to reduce or eliminate setbacks will eliminate potential green space and completely overwhelm the existing size of other buildings in the neighborhood as well as the sidewalk. Now, if you dig into the details, you'll hear that the rationale for the reduced setbacks is that the existing buildings have setbacks of 0. So the request is simply to maintain what's already there. But if you take it to the next step, you'll see that 2 of these buildings with the setbacks of 0 are the ones scheduled for demolition, and the 3rd building would be the only remaining building with a setback of 0 on the entire block. So this building makes up only about 20% of the frontage on the block. It doesn't make any sense to grandfather this lack of setbacks onto this brand new building and extend 0 setbacks onto most of the block. Almost all of the buildings within blocks and blocks away feature proper setbacks. This new development must respect all bylaws regarding setbacks, just as everyone else in the neighborhood has had to. Now, I read the staff report recommending approval of the application, and I'm frankly completely puzzled by its conclusions. It quotes documents such as the Centertown Heritage Conservation District Guidelines, where it says the form of new infill should reflect the character of existing buildings, with massing and setbacks matching earlier rather than later patterns. Then, if you read the next document, the Cultural Heritage Impact Assessment had a single recommendation. It said, Recommendation 1, increase consideration for setbacks along Kent Street to create more human scale and align with the prevailing streetscape. So this recommendation was also completely ignored in the staff report. Third, let's talk about trees. Mature trees contribute to the character of the neighborhood. There are several large mature trees on this property. And frankly, you only find 100-year-old trees when you're dealing with a 120-year-old neighborhood. But this applicant wants to cut down every single tree on the lot. There are several large trees that are perfectly healthy, and the applicant insists they be removed just so they can build all the way to the property line. This will irrevocably change the historic character of the neighborhood and is completely unacceptable.
I'm just giving you the 30-second warning.
Thank you. Lastly, the remaining heritage building is in poor condition. The neighbors have watched the landlords of the heritage building on McLeod let it deteriorate for many years. For instance, the front porch had almost completely collapsed when the landlords were forced by the city to repair it. Is it really likely that this heritage building will be the cornerstone of this new development? Or is it more likely that during construction we might find it's not structurally sound, just like it certainly appears to be, and be forced to tear it down and build something new, just like Somerset House? This is quite possibly another case of early demolition by neglect, just like the other 2 buildings, and all owned by the same landlord. Just in closing, I'd like to quote the Centertown Citizens Community Association on this application. Quickly, they say this association strongly supports infill and intensification, just like we do. These are keys to creating an environmentally and economically sustainable city. Intensification supports neighborhood stores and services and a vibrant culture. However,
Mindy, I'm going to have you stop there. There is someone from the Centertown Association who will be speaking later.
Awesome.
So,
do you want me to read my last sentence?
I
can skip it. All right. It just says that a development must respect the neighborhood's character.
Okay. And I know that Councillor McKenney has a question for you, so hold on, and there's a question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mindy. Thanks for coming out. Actually, you addressed my question in your last set of comments, but I just want to reiterate, and I'd like you to reiterate, because often in Centertown, the prevailing thought is that we just fight intensification, sometimes through other measures. So just want to clarify, we've had many conversations, my office, myself, with you and other neighbors, that the number of units, the density, the intensification that's being proposed here is not the issue. It's how it's being proposed and how the built form is fitting, this built form would fit into the neighborhood. Could you just clarify that?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue from a heritage perspective is certainly that this building doesn't fit into the neighborhood. It doesn't fit in terms of its built form, the way that it's going to come in with zero setbacks, the way it's bigger than everything. That's really the issue, and that's really where we're coming from. There's a lot of other issues, but really that's the fundamental one.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll hear from the CCCA on somewhere. Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Oh, sorry, there's another question from Councillor Wilkinson.
You mentioned that the zoning in that area for setbacks doesn't allow zero setback setting. I think I heard you say that.
I'm not an expert on the zoning. I don't believe that's the case, but my understanding is they're seeking variances for relief from the zoning requirements. Perhaps someone who's more of an expert could speak to that.
Okay, we don't deal with that here.
Right, understood.
But there's something, if we approve things sometimes that have things that are going to require variances, it gets to be kind of tricky. So thank you for bringing that up, and I think we'll have to talk to staff about that.
Yeah, I understand it's not that zoning is not the under the umbrella of heritage, but setbacks certainly are, and how they contribute to the character of the neighborhood. So if you walk down pretty much any street in Centertown, you'll see that setbacks are a prominent feature of these heritage buildings. So this building will not fit that.
I've been there many times, so I know what you're talking about. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much for coming this morning. Our next speaker is Jack Hanna. Good morning and welcome, and as you know, you have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. I'm presenting on behalf of the Planning Committee of the Centertown Citizens Community Association. We want to congratulate the developer for keeping a heritage building. We also appreciate the developers listened to feedback and made some changes, for example, moving the rooftop patio and placing the garbage inside the building. The Cultural Heritage Impact Assessment for this project says, and I quote, "Increase setbacks along Kent Street to increase more human scale and align with the prevailing streetscape." Yesterday was a lovely day in Ottawa, one of the first good ones we've had, so I went for a walk, and I took a tape measure and a clipboard with me. I walked the length of Kent Street. I did a bit of research, and the results of that are in front of you. It's this chart and the accompanying photos. I wanted to know, when it comes to setbacks, what is the prevailing streetscape, the neighborhood character on Kent Street? So I measured. When I say setback, I'm talking about the distance from the vertical face of a building to the outside edge of the curb. In other words, from the wall of the building to the edge of the roadway. I measured the setback of every building 3 stories or taller from the Queensway all the way to Slater, which is almost Parliament Hill. And I want to mention one point at the start. There are buildings with small setbacks, such as the developer is proposing. But almost all of those tiny setbacks are on very old buildings, more than a century old. And those heritage buildings are small 2-story houses. They are tiny structures compared to the massing of what is being proposed. So, on the chart, I have highlighted the substantive buildings within 200 meters of the proposed development. There are 3 of them, and all 3 are similar in height to what is being proposed. Pardon me, all 3 are similar in height and massing to what is being proposed. As you can see, in all 3 cases, the setback is twice what is being proposed, or more than twice. Or we're talking 5, 6, almost 7 meters, compared to, for the proposed building, and I got this off the site plan, 2.7 meters. If you take a look at the rest of Kent Street, all the way down to Slater, with a couple of exceptions, every setback is much bigger than what this developer is proposing. So I asked myself, do we have an example in the real world of what it would be like if the developer eliminated the setback? The answer is we do. There are two substantive buildings on Kent Street, and that's on all of Kent Street, like a kilometer and a half of it, from Parliament Hill to the Queensway, that have setbacks in the range of what this developer is proposing. They're detailed on the second page, right here. Neither is near the site. Both are downtown. In both cases, the setback is 2.2 meters compared to the 2.7 the developer is proposing. 50 centimeters is about that much. So we're talking about that much difference between the buildings you're looking at here and what this developer is proposing. These two buildings with the tiny setbacks are old. Judging from the architecture, I would say they date from the 50s or 60s. In other words, the tiny setback this developer is proposing, no builder has created such a minuscule setback in at least half a century. There's a reason for that. The two photos I've given you are yesterday afternoon beside those two buildings with the small setbacks. There's this photo and this one. I think the photos speak for themselves as to what the experience is when you have a tall vertical wall right up against the sidewalk and close to the curb. As I took the photos, a thought entered my mind. What year am I in? Have I been transported way back in time? I am gobsmacked that in the year 2018, we are even talking about inflicting this on our city. Now, fortunately, Kent Street has retained its human scale. Previous builders have respected setbacks. All up and down Kent, there is space between the face of the building and the sidewalk and the curb. And in that space, there are trees, shrubs, ornamental planters, and
just giving you the 30-second warning.
Yep. So far, Kent has not Kent has not succumbed to the canyon wall effect. If this project is built, that changes. This is not a small change. It is a huge change to the streetscape, to the neighborhood character of not just that portion of Kent, but the entire street. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that impressive legwork and for your presentation this morning. Any questions from members? Councillor Wilkinson?
You say you measured from the curb of the road, but that's not where we measure setback from. So
no, I didn't have legal descriptions of setbacks. So I simply said, how far is the wall from the street? That's
so it. So the sidewalk, whatever these ones are, the sidewalk's in there.
Yeah, the sidewalk's in there.
So some of my noticed in your pictures is just sidewalk and then building.
That's what you get when you have a setback. When you have a setback from the street, such as this developer is proposing, you get what's in the photos. Close to it. I mean, the developer.
But I don't know if the setback is coming from the curb that they're proposing, or from the lot line, which is somewhere back from the.
No, I'm using the curb. The words I use the word setback.
I know you're using that, but I'm not sure when you say what the building is, if that's the same thing or not.
Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Well, if the building says it's a 2-meter setback or whatever it is, that would be from the lot line, not from the road.
Yeah, the setback here, I believe, is 0 on this proposal.
Yeah.
I'm talking about how far is the thing from the curb.
Okay, so it'd probably be like some of the pictures here you have.
Sorry?
You think it'd be more like this picture?
Yeah, it would be like that, except 50 centimeters wider. What the developer is proposing would give you a space 50 centimeters, this much, wider, between the vertical wall and the curb.
Yeah. Okay, I understand. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much for coming. Okay, next on the list is Guy Lacroix. Yeah, I think it's important to state that I think Mr. Hanna was talking about setback in a vernacular sense, and what you were pointing out is in a legal sense, it's from the property line, but I think the idea was this was more of a vernacular setback, just to clarify. Good morning and welcome to the committee. I think as you've heard, you have 5 minutes to speak.
Yes, I'll take less time, hopefully.
My name is Guy Lacroix. I represent the building on McLeod directly beside the proposed plan, so we would be the most affected by this.
I represent Lucy Castell, myself. She has written many emails, detailed in many things. One thing I propose in terms of heritage would be, now it's just an idea, but if you kind of take a look at the picture, I'm sure they don't want to hear this, but if you eliminated the top level and made it 3 floors high as opposed to 4 floors high, I think that would be much more in line with the heritage of around the whole area. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the removal of trees. They plan on removing all the trees. Now, I talked to one person who yesterday, we had a good conversation of possibly maintaining 1 or 2 of the trees in the back. But there's one tree that they're proposing to remove, which they did not talk to us about, which is our tree, which is in between the building. And what kind of sucks is their plans actually have, the big circle there. It's a big Alberta maple. It's, from what I understand, possibly over 100 years old, if not more. And it is perfectly healthy. Nobody's discussed this with us. I find it a little bit rude that nobody's actually just come and said, I'm probably not the proper person for this, but if you come and talk to a certain owner and said, hey, this is what we're thinking of doing, you may get a little bit more, they might be a little bit say, okay, you know what, go ahead. But for us to be completely out of the loop and saying this tree's going to have to come down, that really angers us a little bit. And I find, and maybe a little bit out of scope, but I think the whole idea of heritage is that it's got to have historical and visual significance. Now, this tree is very historical, and I believe it has quite a bit of visual significance, and it brings to the character and the heritage of the whole area. So my proposal would be to eliminate 1 of the floors and to try to maintain this. I don't know if they can make changes to the plan to maintain this tree. And I think it would also give a lot more privacy to both buildings, not just our building, but also to the tenants moving into this building. And I also think that for the amount, and it may be out of scope again, but for the amount of apartments that are going into this building, these very small apartments, I think also as well, that to me takes away from the heritage. It's the complete opposite. That's about it. I think the rest of the people have said, I'm not going to go over what they said, but we've lived there for 19, 20 years. So when she says neglect, we've seen extreme amount of neglect from this landlord. And I think that's partially why some of those 2 other heritage buildings have gone down, included this one, but she's explained to me that they're going to fix all that up, so I'm not going to get into that. But that's it. So hopefully I saved some time from the other people.
Stick around because there's a question from Councillor McKenney.
Hi, Guy. Thanks for coming in.
No comment.
See you. Just on the tree, that tree is on your property. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a bit shared now. It's moved a little bit off of the property.
Yeah, of course. But it's the significant portion of it is on your property.
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, from visiting your place, it provides an immense amount of shading for your home, which is 3 stories high and has got maybe 3 apartments in it. But so all of the residents who live in the home that you live in benefit from the shading from this tree. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And I believe that you have to give permission for any damage to this tree. So I know my office has been working with you, and we'll continue to. I think that if you look at, we could just go back to slide number 5. Bam, there. Well, there. That's the tree that we're talking about. And for anybody outside of, the downtown, that may not look like gold, but in the downtown, that tree might as well be made out of gold. And what that tree does, it allows neighbors to go without air conditioning. It allows, it provides a canopy for not just the person right next to it, but many, many residents around. But it's also, like you say, a visual cue, and it is a part of the heritage of Centretown. And it is absolutely imperative that we do everything that we can to save this tree and every other one. So I thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming out this morning. We'll turn to our next speaker, who is Jennifer Blair. Good morning and welcome to the subcommittee.
Good morning, thanks. Thanks everybody for reading a letter that I sent yesterday and for hearing today. I live at 438 McLeod Street, so I live on the west side of Kent, on the south side. And the setbacks issue that have already been addressed are of really a serious concern to those of us also living on that side of Kent. It's going to absolutely change our experience of our light, our experience of walking down that street. And so I want to echo what some others have said, what also I believe the Heritage Report says about the significance of setbacks to heritage. But I actually want to move to another point and think actually about how we might consider the demolition of the two buildings on Kent Street to be a bad idea. And I want to contest what's been said about the idea that the contextual value of those two buildings are second-rate or minimal or something like this. First of all, those two houses, when you look at them, I realize you might think, oh, those are wooden structures with siding, they don't look great. That hurts my feelings a bit because my house looks like that, except for I, painted it a nicer color and put nicer things around the windows. But some of us live in those houses. They're great houses. They have some of the best foundations in the city. They're stable. They're valuable buildings. I also want to point out that, well, first of all, I did look up the Ottawa Directory for the 1890s. And guess what? Did I find that a former prime minister or a member of the Group of Seven lived in those houses? No. I found out that Bridges Girling, a laborer with his 6 children, immigrant from England, lived in those houses. But I want to think about this. There's actually a precedent in Ottawa for saving wooden-clad laborers' houses. This is something that's happening in urban design across the country. I'll give you 2 examples. One is the Gammon House in Vanier. It's actually been designated as a heritage site. A second one, which was actually something that happened between the owners and the residents, is just a block away on Flora Street, those fantastic wooden townhouses where they built 2 infills around the early 1990s, right, to kind of respect that site. So the fact that these are old wooden buildings, the fact that they don't look great, which is something that is really the fact of the landlords doing, doesn't necessarily mean that we should look at them and think, oh yeah, let's take those down right away. I want to speak a bit, though, to the actual contextual value of those buildings, which is in point 3 of my letter, which is that, in fact, 443 Kent Street has huge cultural value. It's been a major music venue in the Ottawa punk, hardcore, and alternative music scene for over a decade. And I'm not just talking about, I'm not trying to glorify house parties for you. I'm talking about at least 2 bands that have been shortlisted for the Polaris Prize have played there. And the last band that played there has been reviewed in Rolling Stone, was voted the best band by independent music band in Canada by Exclaim magazine. It's consistently reviewed by Pitchfork, which is the snobbiest and most rarefied music review site in existence, to the extent of 8s and 8.5s. Right? This is actual heritage that I think that should be considered in this building. If only to think about why we need houses on Kent and not big buildings, right? We actually have what could be considered a creative corridor on Kent Street. We've got the photography studio just right at Gladstone. We've got Chris Griffin's house and art studio there. If we start to build buildings which clearly, as we've seen from all the pictures, are not human scale, do not look like what the neighborhood should look like. If we start to build those buildings, we're going to get a different kind of way of living, a different kind of inhabitability in our neighborhood, right? So I'm wanting to actually imagine that there could be a different sort of way of addressing this site, a different sort of way of using these existing properties, right? That's why we moved to this neighborhood. We like the heritage value of the neighborhood. We like the level, the 2-story level that these houses are at right now. So I urge you to consider the first proposal to demolish these houses and to consider the possibility that that does not need to happen and that there is precedent in Ottawa for that already. And my other concern is simply that because these houses, as we've spoken to before, have been the idea of demolition by neglect is quite significant, and I'm concerned that these houses have been so poorly maintained that what we're actually looking at is a proposal for a much bigger building that will look as bad or worse as these, right? So one email from a former tenant said the landlord is a slumlord who does no repairs at all. And I'm concerned now that we're only going to be introducing a much, much bigger concern with much, much bigger buildings, many, many, many more tenants, that the intensification isn't the issue. The issue is how will the site actually be maintained, and how will that kind of work according to its look and
Your time's almost up, sorry.
the community.
Okay. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming out this morning. Any questions? Seeing none, I'm just going to ask staff to comment on one point that I think is an important point of clarification.
Sure.
Because a number of speakers have used the expression demolition by neglect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to clarify with staff whether the state of the building, the structural integrity or lack of structural integrity, was that a factor in the reevaluation of the two buildings?
Mr. Chair, there was no structural engineer report conducted for this. It was simply visual analysis as well as research into the history of the buildings as far as materials go. They were initially wood-clad back when they were constructed, and through my research I could tell that until the 60s they were clad in wood. They were later changed to stucco and angel stone, and then as you see now, they are now with vinyl siding. The window openings have been altered. So no, there's no structural engineer report to... And no property standards orders were issued from what we could tell, speaking of property standards.
Okay. The reason I think that's important clarification is it's not taking away from an argument that one wants to make that the contextual value or the physical value or associated value is higher than what staff are purporting. One can make that argument. But I think it's important to state that this is apparently not a case of demolition by neglect. This is not a case where the state of the building has influenced the score. And the reason I say this is that it's important, the term, it does happen. This is a phenomenon we see throughout the city. Somerset House was mentioned. But it's important that this term remains an accurate one because it is a serious issue. But I just wanted to point that out, that there's nothing in the report or in staff's analysis that suggests this is a case of demolition by neglect. Okay. So again, I'm not taking away at all from anyone's ability to argue that the score should be higher, but I just wanted to make that clarification.
Can I respond to that then?
Sure, briefly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I understand that. So let's set the term aside, though. I just wanted to say yet again that when we look at these pictures, I believe that the pictures might influence in a vernacular version of that, and that we need to think about this site a little bit differently than the report suggests.
And that's a fair point.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Thank you again for coming out this morning.
Sorry.
Yeah, so you go ahead, because there's a question to staff, but you don't need to stay. I'm going to call the next speaker up as you leave, and you have a question to staff. So as Linda Hode gets ready to come to the microphone, your question to staff, Councillor McKinney?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It actually just follows up on yours. I just wonder what the process is for the reevaluation from Category 2 to limited heritage value. I was never part of any discussion, and I don't know, does that continue to happen in other parts of the district?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We did not actually rescore the buildings. We reviewed them, so I think I mentioned in my presentation they are Category 2, so that was the scoring that was done in the 1995 study. And on the survey form for that study, it indicates there are minor examples of turn-of-the-century buildings with low architectural value. So at this point, 20 years later, we're not entirely sure why they were given a Category 2. And in the plan at the time, since it's a pre-2005 plan, there's no guidelines for demolition of buildings regardless of their status. And as far as the application goes, we did not actually rescore them. We just reviewed them in their current status and to determine whether there's enough cultural heritage value there to keep them.
But just to be clear, they are still a Category 2 building?
Yes, they are.
Buildings. Okay, thank you. I think that's important to...
That's hugely important.
Okay. So, can I just...
All right.
I think I'm going to pause because we have a number of speakers still, and then we can get back into this discussion afterwards. Ms. Hode, welcome to the subcommittee.
Thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of Heritage Ottawa.
We did review the application and we have sent in some comments. I would like to highlight a few of the things in our submission. We strongly support the CHIS recommendation for increased setback along Kent Street, as many people have mentioned. The zero lot line for two and a half story houses is very different in impact than a zero lot line for a long 4-story building. There's articulation or there's a rhythm on the street that simply isn't there with the 4-story building. Access to parking under the building doesn't have the same impact as driveways, which create a space leading to a rear yard. So I think it's very important that the setback be reconsidered. It would, as everybody has pointed out, allow for landscaping and trees along the street, which is very important if we're trying to establish a residential character or maintain a residential character. The other thing that could be explored was the Heritage Conservation District guideline for U and H-shaped buildings. The report says, well, there isn't enough room. Well, maybe this isn't the right development for this particular location. The U-shape doesn't have to be enormous. There just needs to be some articulation of that huge frontage. Perhaps even a step back between the third story, something to reduce the impact of the massing. We also support the plans that are shown for the retention of the semi-detached house on McLeod. However, there needs to be a separation between that building and the new building in order to emphasize the heritage character of the semi-detached. It should be read as a separate building, distinct from the massing of the new construction. We did also question the notion of reclassification, and we understand that it's not reclassified, it's reviewed in the context of the development proposal. But what this does reveal is the serious problem of out-of-date Heritage Conservation District plans. That plan says there's no demolition. Well, now we're having demolition. So, and the more recent plans, I think, do offer guidelines for demolition. We really have to get down to reviewing the Heritage Conservation Districts in light of the revised Ontario Heritage Act, so that people know what to expect. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming out. Any questions for Ms. Hood? I see none, so thank you for your intervention. So next on the list, I've got Matthew McElligott and Rod Leahy. I don't know if you're coming up together or separate, as you wish. Yeah.
Sorry. Good morning.
Good morning and welcome. I'll give you a little bit of leeway since you both signed up, so if you need more than 5 minutes, you can have it because you both signed up, so over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to introduce myself for the public record. My name is Matthew McElligott. I'm with FO10 Consultants. I'm the agent for the applicant, joined here by
Rod Leahy from Roderick I Arctic.
So we're here really to just respond to questions and concerns that we've heard here today. I did want to reiterate some of the things that I've heard from you, Mr. Chair.
Just speak a little bit closer to the mic. Yeah.
I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that I heard from you, Mr. Chair, which was what I heard from some of the concerned residents about the demolition by neglect. I obviously would agree with your distinction that you made, in fact, that the building has gone through some different iterations on the exterior cladding, originally with wood and then stucco. So over the years, it hasn't been completely neglected, and I just wanted to reiterate your words on that. In addition, we've heard a lot about the setbacks, and this was something that obviously we met with the community association and we wanted to address here today. The increase, first and foremost, we can't preserve the existing heritage building that's at the corner of Kent and McLeod without addressing the zoning and the setbacks. And that building does sit at the property line, and it is a 0-meter setback. So we would be requesting a 0-meter setback for that portion of the building along Kent. So I think it's an important distinction that, we have to recognize an existing situation if we're going to preserve a heritage resource. In addition to that, we have increased the setback to 30 centimeters from the property line. So whereas previously the building is actually built on the property line, so the building faces actually today on the property line, we are increasing it to a foot or 30 centimeters. And in addition to that, and I'll let the project architect, my colleague here, speak to the architecture of the building, but the introduction of some building articulation will actually increase that setback, so it's not just a monolithic wall on Kent Street as expressed by the residents. The last thing I wanted to mention, and obviously we're here to answer any questions and concerns, is to the tree preservation. I've met with the owner. I understand. And first and foremost, I think I completely agree with his comment with regards to we should have approached him before we submitted the application. But in fact, it wasn't on our radar that this tree was straddling the property line. So I apologize for not having approached him prior to the application being submitted. But I did meet with him yesterday, and I think we had a good constructive conversation, and I think there will be efforts made to preserve at least one of the trees in the rear yard on our property or on the subject property. The remaining trees, well, save and except for the one that straddles the property line, the remaining trees are all leaning, and I would say they're probably not in great health. I'm not an arborist, but we will be retaining an arborist to visit the site to analyze all the trees, in addition to evaluating the value of the tree in question, which straddles the property line. So I can appreciate that this is an issue that the neighbor is concerned about, and we are working. We are trying to work with him to resolve the issue prior to obviously going to planning committee and prior to site plan approval. Of course, this to me is more of a site plan issue, but I'll leave it at that. And just to say, it's not finished yet. We are still trying to work out how to provide some kind of compensation.
Okay. Mr. Leahy, did you want to follow up?
Just a quick few notes just on the process. Our first, a site like this, one of the first things we do, of course, meet with city staff and in particular Heritage, and we get a lot of our cues moving forward from that early discussion. So the discussion on the retention of the existing building at the corner obviously came up. Of course, the first reaction of my client, and probably every client you probably see here, let's tear it down and replicate it. That was a non-starter for everybody involved, and so we were able to convince the client this is the best approach, was to maintain this building and remove, which was unsightly, the additions to the back, and move forward with the preservation of the existing buildings. And we did get clear, I'd say, a clear discussion regards to the two white houses. And again, I think with the retention of those houses, this project obviously wouldn't move forward. My client is trying to provide some affordable rental units in here in an area which I think needs it drastically. And so we set about doing a design that I think works well. I'm quite proud of the design. Actually, for this iteration is probably the first design I've really truly enjoyed. I think what it does is, one, preserves the building, but also if you look at the architecture of it, sets up that vertical rhythm that's so important. So in a sort of a modern contemporary way, we're recreating that tight vertical pattern, the fact that we've set back the entire building a foot back from the existing heritage building, and then we've recessed those channels, which sets up that sort of vertical rhythm of the street, which is important in the establishment and the strengthening of that residential character of Kent Street. Kent Street is a very interesting street because it is a mix of residential and commercial. but this is a very tight site. And one of the things we looked at different ways to develop the site, and one of them was actually doing an L-shaped building that went into the rear yard. In our opinion, that had serious negative impact on all of the property owners in the area, and so we purposely kept out of the rear yard and tried to keep that with increased green space and surface parking, and simplify the building and moving the mass toward the street, where we thought Kent Street, being a wider street with a mix of uses, could handle it. So the architecture is, again, I think sympathetic, having the 3 stories of brick transitioning down to the 2-story bricks on either end, and using a contemporary modern material on the 4th floor, in a way creates that setback that people were talking about, but it is sort of a visual setback as opposed to a physical setback. So I'm quite proud of this building. I think this is a type of infill. I think that is good infill. It's less density than could be achieved. It's less height. If you look at Gladstone and its traditional Main Street, the potential on Gladstone as it develops will be larger, bigger buildings. Kent Street, as it evolves, it already is an important street, but it will evolve over time too. And I think you'll see over time sidewalks widen, similar to what they're doing to Main Street and Elgin Street and all the downtown streets. So I think this will be a welcome addition when it's finished. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I know there are a number of questions, so we'll start with Member Small.
Thank you. I realize the setback is sort of a site plan issue, but I see the recommendation number 1 of the CHIS about the increase in the consideration for setbacks, and certainly from my perspective, going from the 2 small houses with spacing in between them to a large structure like this would have a tremendous negative impact, in my view, on the street. And I wondered if you had given any consideration or why you hadn't to increasing that setback so that respects the setbacks in other houses, or doing as Heritage Ottawa had suggested with some sort of courtyard or something so that you get that spacing. I think a 1-foot strip will end up being a paved strip, and if it isn't paved, it'll just be a desolate little zone that does absolutely nothing for the street. Thanks.
Well, as I mentioned, we created breaks we pushed back in those vertical reveals. We pushed back another 2 feet, so we've got a 3-foot gap, and it's actually a window well, so it can't be paved because it actually allows light into that lower level. Again, it was one of those value decisions where do we increase the setback and then try to achieve that density by moving into the rear yard, which we kept out of. So, in every project you're trying to balance that where the impact is going to be greater effect. Do you build in a rear yard that has issues of overlook and those type of negative impacts, or do you move up the street? We do a lot of work in traditional main streets and arterial main streets where we're being directed by staff to move our buildings up to the sidewalks, and that are creating actually interesting animated streets. So we think this was a balancing point, and we thought we moved in the right direction. So it was definitely thought. We had a number of different options on how to develop this site. The recessed middle made it very difficult to actually get any meaningful development. It's a fairly tight site. So, but it was given a tremendous amount of thought. I don't disagree. Again, we just chose to place the building in a way that we thought would have least impact on the people most affected.
If I may as well, Mr. Chair, just add to that. Two things, and despite what the gentleman from the CCCA had mentioned, there are a few buildings that are built to the property line along Kent Street, number 1. And number 2, we can't ignore the planned function in the existing zoning. And that portion, the northern portion of the site, where one of the houses, one of the white homes actually is a TM zone. So that would effectively allow you to build to the property line anyways.
I'm going to challenge you on that point. The reason why there's no setback on a traditional main street is because the expectation is that it's a commercial main street front. So I would be careful with that analogy, because this is actually a residential function, and so the point is there isn't going to be public interaction between the sidewalk and the entrance. So,
Sorry, can I challenge you on that?
Well, let me ask a question, and then you're welcome to respond. I think the other thing that I'm skeptical about is if you speak about the neighboring site, the 425 McLeod Street, you have to recognize that that setback is a side yard setback with a property that faces McLeod and not Kent. So it's a little bit disingenuous to use that setback as some sort of guidance for you as you move forward, because we're talking about two very different setbacks. But my question, and you can certainly respond to my comment, but let me ask a question to Rod Leahy, which is, I've certainly seen in my ward, in which there are two heritage conservation districts, some very effective infill. And one which is about to be built is very similar in the sense of you have a number of brick homes. It's a proposed four-story property. Most of the brick homes are two-story. And what the architect did in that case, which was very, very effective, is he provided a step back after the second story so that the massing reads from the street front as two stories with a step back third and fourth. So it's a very effective way of both, in some ways, hiding some of that massing and providing a node to the character of the two-story treatment in terms of the predominant built feature of that street. And so my question is that something that you considered, and if not, why not?
I think we considered a number of things. I'm not sure particularly on that. I think what we're trying to do with all these cases, try to keep, again, to create a cost-effective building, to try to make it relatively simple, and try to use the change in materials as that means of articulation that you're speaking to. And with regards to your to the second point, let's say, about the setback, I wasn't talking about the side yard setback off of the McLeod Street. If you look at the site plan, I was talking about the redevelopment of that surface area that we're showing as the land parking. There was a design that actually moved our building into that rear yard, that large square area that is parking. That is development potential, and we elected to keep out of that area as opposed to adjusting any sort of side yard setbacks. Sorry. And with regards to the first point on TM zone, the TM zone actually allows for all residential buildings. But what I was talking about is the physical experience of in a TM zone with the buildings up against the sidewalk. I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing in an urban setting, is what I was getting at. And I know the TM zone contemplates ground floor commercial, but it allows all residential buildings as well with zero setback. So, okay. Anyways, it was, again, more about the physical space as opposed to use. And I understand what you're saying. Okay.
Okay. I see no other questions, so thank you both for coming out this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So next on our list is Hal Pirley. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. This will be very quick. I'm going to raise 3 points. First of all, the tree that's being possibly taken away or modified in the rear of that building. I'm not up on the law or anything like that, but I'd just like to throw my support behind my neighbor, saying, you know, it's been there for generations. And good neighbors, I don't know the law, but it seems to me, from a common sense point of view, you know, good neighbors don't move in and cut down trees that have been there for generations if they're healthy trees. My second point is I understand, I just learned this morning actually, that the porch on the McLeod side of the building is possibly going to be, you know, it will be kept, but I've heard just this morning that it's not going to be modified or spruced up in any way. It's a bit run down. Could we ask the developer to spruce that up in some way? Very simple. My third point is My compliments to the architect. I mean, there are aspects of this design that, frankly, look pretty good to me, some of them. The face on Kent Street, to my eye, however, it looks a bit institutional, like a big high school has been planted there, or maybe a penitentiary even. It just looks a bit cliff-like. My apologies to the architect again. That face, I think, just looks a bit too cliff-like, a little too institutional. The 30 centimeter setback is not a lot. And as the gentleman just pointed out, it's going to be paved, so that's 30 centimeters of pavement, and I don't think that really counts. I don't think that really helps. I would like to suggest a tree. Could we not have and I think the representative from Heritage Ottawa suggested this. Can we not have a dent in this building and put a tree in there? And if you can't get that, can we get some ivy on there? Brick looks great with ivy. Can we ask the developer to put a nice ivy on that face? And I think that would look fantastic, actually. I think it would look great. Just within 3 houses of this development, there are several houses that are covered with ivy, and they look fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And if we can't do that, can we paint the damn thing green or something? I don't know. We live there. Can you throw us a bone? Can you throw us a bone? We live there. If you just want a little green or something, can you put a tree on the roof? A couple of trees, maybe 4 or 5, shrubbery or something. Can you do that? Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming out this morning. Any questions from Mr. Pirway? I see none. Thank you. Thank you again. So that exhausts the speakers list. So now we can move into questions to staff or comments. Councillor Wilkinson.
One of the things we sometimes look at with the heritage buildings is not just the building but also the landscape. We've certainly done that in a lot of the other ones. So I don't know, that tree, which is one issue right there, there's the tree and there's also the green space along Kent Street. There's 2 issues that have come up with landscape. And at one point I heard a comment that we might take the area where you have the very limited number of car parking and take it away. So I don't know what they expect people to do to have cars. But a few people still do have cars, even in downtown. And on-street parking is one thing that's available there. But there's one different thing. When you have a lot more units, it has a lot more cars, and the space they take up is not available for that many. So I wouldn't want to lose what little bit they've got. But how are we dealing with things like the tree that's mostly on a neighbor's property? A tiny bit might be on theirs. And that doesn't seem to have come up in the site plan. And how are we going to make sure that we have more than about the width from here to this other end of this desk of green lawn next to the sidewalk, which is the minimum width of a sidewalk anyway. When this is actually a residential component, it's a place where people do stand in front of the front door and talk when they're going home, and all sorts of things happen. So I'd just like to know how you're dealing with that. Although there's site plan issues, we have raised them here from time to time. I think we need to at least make a comment to the owner about this, because if we want them to have more, they're going to have to do some redesign in their building, and that affects the size of their units, and it has quite a few impacts when you shrink a little building.
Thank you for the question. I think a lot of those issues are site plan issues, and we have the development planner, Steve Gauthier, here to answer them. Perhaps that's probably best to start, Steve, if you want to actually talk about how you're dealing with the tree issue in particular and the front yard stuff.
So as part of the zoning application, there's also a site plan application, and we are very well aware of the concern about the existing trees. The Alberta maple on the interior side lot line is being, as mentioned by the applicant, they've hired an arborist. We also have our forester looking at it. So we have asked if there were measures that were possible to preserve the trees. I understand also there's discussion that can take place between the 2 neighbors if they can come to an agreement to remove the tree. If not, measures have to be presented to staff to see how can the tree be preserved. That could result in I'm no forester, but it could result in modification to the building or measures taken in the ground to protect the critical root zone. I think your question was also about the front setback. As you could see, and could we get the site plan on the...
It's very narrow.
Yeah, it's very narrow. Yeah, the site is very narrow, as you can see. So there's the Alberta maple tree on the east side. There's the tight setback on Kent that aligns with the existing heritage home on the corner. Articulation, or as you can see, the facade of the building sunk at different locations. Landscaping was proposed. I understand it's not mature trees, but we're in the middle of the discussion. I've heard the comments this morning. We'll further discuss with the applicant what can be done. But as I explained, it's a tight site, so there's concern on each side, on the east and west side. So there's going to have to
change the size of the building. I mean, that's the main concern I have. If these things are going to happen, then this building itself has to, the look of it wouldn't change much, but the interior layout would change a bit if the building's slightly smaller. And I don't want what we approve here to lock in the size of the building so that making the changes that we might need on the site plan can't be made. And so it's partly site plan, it's partly on our approval. Because when we approve the fact of taking the buildings down, that's pretty straightforward. But when we approve the design of the building, does that actually include the size of the building? Or is it just the appearance of the building? Because otherwise, what we're doing here is we're taking away that flexibility that you have in the site plan.
Mr. Chair, there is flexibility built into these reports because we always have minor design changes delegated to authority, to staff for changes. So that concern could be addressed. If the configuration changes through negotiations about the tree, that could be addressed through minor design changes that you approve as one of your recommendations.
I would suggest that this is not a minor design change. Yeah, that's the difficulty. I think that it could be more than minor, in which case I would think it would probably even have to come back here if they have to do more major. I think it's really up to the local council. She has to sign off on the site plan. And in doing that, I'm going to leave it in her hands to make whatever changes. I heard what she was saying earlier, so I think she's on that same wavelength. I have no problem with saying you can't build as many units. I don't know how many units are even in this. It doesn't say. I didn't see it in the report. And how many units are in total? 31. And right now, how many do they have there? About 6, maybe, or 8, maybe. So and that's why we're going to get concerned about the car parking because, those are going to be more people than have cars in. I counted 6 or 7 spots only, and and I know other apartments I've been told they in downtown they go to 0.5, so there's 1 for every 2 units. This is about 1 for every 4, which is what they do in seniors' retirement residences, and there's still not enough. And the street parking for all those people getting permits when you can't even park on Kent Street in rush hour is going to be causing tremendous strain on the whole rest of the community because you can't, the buildings, street parking is supposed to sort of take the ones that are right in that area. They can't do that with 31 or 25 or whatever's left. So, and people say you don't need cars downtown. No, you don't for getting around downtown. But you might want to go and visit people that are not downtown sometimes, and a lot of people have cars for that purpose. So, and some of them use virtual car, which makes sense, but not everybody does. And so I'm a little concerned that this site plan is so tight for the site. And I like the appearance of the building. They've done a great job in trying to make it so it fits into other buildings in the area. I don't have a problem with that. I just have a problem with how much of building there is. And we're worried about the fact it might be more than minor, in which case, how are you going to deal with it?
Mr. Chair, the committee could choose to provide direction to staff to continue to work on the design of this, if that is a choice. It's a concern regarding design and what minor means, but I would like to assure the committee that the interpretation of minor is highly subjective, obviously. Member Quinn pointed that out. But if the intent and purpose of the building and its design expression remains the same, and it changes size or shape, we generally consider that as a minor design change.
Well, I'll leave it with Councillor McKinney to give you what direction she might think at this stage.
Okay, why don't we turn to Councillor McKinney, because I know that she had very similar ideas in mind. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for everyone for coming out. It's in the downtown, we especially in the last decade, and as we move into a new era of light rail, and certainly the affordability in downtown is being lost, and it's important that we increase residential opportunities for everyone in the downtown. That's single-family homes for those of us fortunate enough to be able to live on the ground floor, to condos, to rental, to supportive housing, affordable housing, all the way, the complete gamut. And rental housing is an important part of that. I think of some of the staff in my office who can't afford to live downtown. They should be able to. They should be able to rent an apartment downtown. They should be able to start a family in an apartment downtown. And right now that's not happening. So, on the one hand, that's what we want. This is what we want. We want increased density. We want some, affordable, quote unquote, opportunities for folks. But we also, at the same time, need schools. We need trees. We need the green space. We need units to be big enough for families. They can't all be bachelors in one. Families can live in a 2-bedroom. I do. It needs to be close to transit. And so, when we are presented with an application like this, it puts us in a difficult position, because we don't want to be seen as not supporting that increase in density and that affordability and that opportunity for people to live downtown, to start their careers downtown, start their families downtown. But at the same time, when we look at the heritage character of our streets, we have to maintain that. We only get one chance. Once it's gone, it's gone. We're never going to knock down this building and set it back. So, today we're being asked to do two things. One is to approve the application to demolish 2 homes on Kent Street. But at the same time, we're not compelling the applicant then to respect the setback that should be there. Granted, it's not there for these 2 homes, but as Member Smallwood pointed out, it's very different. The visual aspect of 2 homes with separation is very different than one entire long wall with no commercial. It's for me today, I'm not going to be able to vote in favor of the application until I see a commitment from the developer to work with staff on the setback. We have setbacks for a reason. I understand that it's not a sharp instrument. We don't go down to the inch all the time. But it puts us in very difficult positions when we're asked to do 2 things that really are not part of in this case, the Heritage District guidelines. So I'm going to, as Councillor Wilkinson also pointed out, I'm going to direct that staff work with the applicant here to increase that setback along Kent Street in line with the recommendations of the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement to provide an enhanced landscape buffer. I think if we can come up with something that fits into the neighborhood, that provides for that soft landscaping, more trees. Perhaps then we can look at this as one package. But until that happens, it's really, I just feel like we're being asked to give away everything here for 31 units instead of, coming to the table and seeing what we can do to make sure that Kent Street evolves into a great good residential street, but maintains its heritage aspect. So, 31 units is nice, but so is 25, so is 20, and I do believe that we can get something back in front of us that respects the heritage district aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Quinn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody who came out today. There were some excellent presentations. I would like to express my concern about the reevaluation of the two buildings. The buildings were given a Category 2 in the original Heritage Conservation District report and guidelines built around that. The decision to now evaluate them as non-contributing to the Conservation District on a sort of ad hoc basis, I think is problematic and should be avoided. I think that from what staff have said, the building was not scored again. It seems to be a decision that was based on changing of materials over time. There was no structural evaluation of either of these buildings. And I think also one of the people from the community did show that there is some interesting associative values to these structures that were not uncovered by staff either. Associative values don't always have to be about former prime ministers. So I think some interesting new information was brought forward in that regard. But I do want to express that I feel there is a concern about this ad hoc approach on reevaluating individual buildings within Part 5 designated districts. I won't reiterate what I've heard elsewhere today, but I do support my colleague, Councillor McKenney, and I will not be supporting the staff recommendation either. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Quinn. Member Small?
I certainly support what Councillor McKenney had said. I support the intensification, but I'm also extremely concerned about the cultural heritage impact study and just the impact of a zero or a very minimal lot line. And I just wondered, is there what I think would be very helpful would be enough of a setback that would allow a tree to grow or trees to grow. And I'm just wondering, is there, like, what would that, do you have a definition of what that would be? Like, does it have to be 2 meters, or is there something you can give us some guidance on what that setback should be so that it doesn't just become a wasteland? Thank you.
Specifically, we'd have to see what's there. We'd have to see what's underground, what utilities are there. There's possibilities we could use silva cells to reduce setback requirements. I can't give you a firm number, but we can work with a landscape architect to come up with something.
Okay. I'm getting a sense from the intervention from my colleagues that if I were to put this to a vote, that the committee would likely reject the recommendation for this application. And in my mind, that would be an unfortunate outcome because I think, as Councillor McKenney articulately stated, there are a lot of good things about this application. We recognize that intensification means change, and we have to be flexible in our understanding of how that works in order to accommodate it. But at the same time, we do have to make sure that we're respecting rules and sensitive to the fact that once you build a building like this, and it looks like a very high quality building, it's with us for hopefully a century or more. So my suggestion to the committee, because I would hate to reject the recommendation outright because I think it's close, but I think we've heard a number of issues, predominantly the setback on the Kent Street side. We've heard concerns about the tree and the rear lot area. I would reiterate the concern about the option of a step back at the third or fourth story. And by the way, I did note that there are two versions in the rendition, one in the CHIS and one in the staff presentation, that have different level of brick reveals, one at 2-story and one at 3. So I think it would be important to understand what staff's advice is on that. But I think the option of at least some step back at the third story to reflect the history of the 2-story buildings there is something worth exploring. So to avoid a rejection of this application, given that I think there is a lot of value there, I'm going to recommend to colleagues that we refer this back to staff for a 1-month period. And what that does is that doesn't delay the application because it's not coming to Planning Committee on the zoning amendments until the end of June. So by doing that, we're not pushing the deadlines any further back, but we are giving heritage staff and planning staff a month to work on these issues and hopefully come back with an improved application to this committee at the June meeting. And that would be my preference because, again, I think an outright rejection of this would be a mistake, but I agree with colleagues that there's no question that this application can be improved. So if that meets with the committee's approval, I'm just going to read it out, and I'm going to have it moved by Councillor McKenney. Be it resolved that the applications for demolition and new construction at 443 and 447 Kent Street and for alteration at 423, 425 McLeod Street be referred to staff for further review. And be it further resolved that the Built Heritage Subcommittee refer this matter to staff with a request the revised report be brought back to the Built Heritage Subcommittee in such time as to permit consideration by the Subcommittee, Planning Committee, and Council. And I'm going to pause because I don't think the current timelines allow this to be considered by Council prior to June 14th, but that's what the draft motion says. So can I just pause for a brief second?
Mr. Chair, you want this to come back to Built Heritage?
Yes.
Okay. And so it's my understanding right now that that's a June 14th meeting? Correct. Okay. And so I would simply insert the words prior to its meeting. Prior to its meeting of June 14th, 2018, and upon the receipt today of a written confirmation from the applicant that they will extend the 90-day timeline under the Ontario Heritage Act to allow this to go beyond so that we can make the Planning Committee meeting of June 26th and the Council meeting after that.
Okay. Well, can I just, this is a bit unorthodox, but can the applicant's representative indicate whether they would be willing to extend the 90-day period in order to allow us to refer this matter? Okay. I think I'm going to take Mr. McGilligan at his word, and why don't we just make that minor change to, we're dealing with the June 14th BHSC, but we won't be able to get it through Planning and Council, so we just have to make a slight wording amendment, which as was just read out. So on that basis, is that referral motion carried? Okay. Okay, great. So thank you very much to members of the public for coming out. Thank you to the applicant, and thank you to staff. Any notices of motion? Any inquiries or other business? Okay, we are adjourned, and maybe I can just make a quick comment about our next meeting. Right now, our meeting is scheduled for the afternoon of Thursday, the 14th of June. It's possible that we may have to change that to another time that week, but for now, we're going to hold that. Okay. Well, it looks like there will be a very strong possibility that we will move that date, and I think please expect that could be a longer meeting because we have hopefully a number of big applications coming to our next meeting. We're adjourned. Thank you.